A pleasant day to all history learners. On this topic, we will learn another Philippine history. It was all about the Tejeros Assembly. What is the Tejeros Assembly? The Tejeros Convention, also known as the Tejeros Assembly and the Tejeros Congress, was a meeting held on March 22, 1897 in the Friar State House in Barrio Tejeros, a part of town of San Francisco ni Montalban. Now it was called the General Trias sa lalawigan ng Cavite. It was the first ever presidential and vice presidential election of the Philippine history, and we all know that our first president in our country is Emilio Aguinaldo. So it means during the Tejeros Assembly na-elect atong first president of the Philippines. It was a meeting agreed between the two groups o pinagpulungan ng dalawang maghihimagsik ng himagsikang Pilipino, the Magdiwang faction na pinamumunuan ni Andres Bonifacio at Magdalo faction na pinamumunuan naman ni Emilio Aguinaldo. So before this assembly happened, what is the reason why nagmeeting man sila in the Tejeros nganong naa may Tejeros Assembly nga nahitabo during these times? So let's find out what is the reason. So during this time, Spaniards already colonized the Philippines. So panahon pala ito ng mga Espanyol na nanakop sa ating bansa. In 1892, Bonifacio joined Jose Rizal's organization na tinatawag na La Liga Filipina, which called for reform of the Spanish colonial regime in the Philippines. But after their first meeting of Bonifacio and Rizal's organization, the Spanish officials arrested Rizal and deported him to the southern island of Mindanao. Then, after ma-deport si Jose Rizal, nagpadayon gihapon si Andres Bonifacio o ang mga miyembro sa La Liga Filipina to maintain pressure on the Spanish government to free the Philippines. So together with Bonifacio's friends, they founded a group called Katipunan. So diri nagsugod ang pagkakaroon ng mga Katipuneros dito sa ating bansa. For short, si Bonifacio ang nangulo sa Katipunan. Katipunan or kataas-taasang kagalang-galangang katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan. Literally, the highest and most respected society of the children of the country. It was dedicated to arm resistance against the colonial government. Ang katipunan ay di lang binubuo ng mga middle class, pati na rin ang mga lower class people. So there is no bias or discrimination happen if you are part of the katipunan. Kaya nga may mga kartilya ng katipunan para magabayan sila sa mga tamang gawin as katipuneros. So pagkadugayan, nagkaana mong katako ang katipunan organization hangtod sa establish na sila og mga regional branches sa iba't ibang lalawigan ng Pilipinas. Ug usa na dito ang Cavite na pinamumunuan ni Emilio Aguinaldo. Kay nagkadako naman ng Katipunan Organization, pagka 1895, nahimong top leader or Presidente Supremo of the Katipunan si Andres Bonifacio. So diri na time gitawag na siya as Supremo. So under sa leadership ni Bonifacio, sa permero pa nagsugod ang Katipunan Organization na pa sila 300 members. Hantod sa nagkadagan sila up to 30,000 ng mga Katipuneros nga estimated lang po iyon. To prepared enough to start fighting for freedom from Spain. In 1896, na-realize sa mga taga Spanish colonial government na rebellion nga nahitabo. So ilang gipang dakop o gipang preso ang mga hundreds of people ug ilang gi-charge as a treason or pagbetray sa government. Usa na sa mga nadakpan na pod si Jose Rizal. So katong na-deport siya sa Mindanao, nag-request siya og petisyon na makalaya, but in exchange nahimo siyang military doctor, but still nadakpan na pud siya. for the charge of treason or pagbetray sa government. But Bonifacio and his friends tried to help Rizal to escape, but Rizal refused. Bonifacio kicked off the revolt by leading thousands of his followers to tear up their community tax certificates or the cedulas. This signaled their refusal to pay any more taxes to the Spanish colonial regime. So this is the year 1896 started the Philippine Revolution. The first days of the Philippine Revolution saw the defeat of the Katipunan in Manila, forcing Bonifacio and his men to retreat to the mountains of Montalban. Bonifacio was forced to withdraw to Marikina, Montalban, and San Mateo, and his group suffered heavy casualties. While the group in Cavite had the greatest success in driving the Spanish out. Cavite's rebels were led by an upper-class politician called Emilio Aguinaldo. The Katipunan under Emilio Aguinaldo managed to subdue the Spanish forces by surprise and take control of the province. As a more successful military leader and a member of much wealthier, more influential family, Emilio Aguinaldo felt justified in forming his own rebel government in opposition to Bonifacio's. So nag-decide si Emilio Aguinaldo na magbuhat siya own government niya nga lahi sa government ni Bonifacio. So as the two factions, the factions of Bonifacio and the faction of Emilio Aguinaldo, which are called the Magdiwang and the Magdalog factions, fighting each other over territory and logistics. Unable to resolve their differences, Aguinaldo invited the Supremo Andres Bonifacio to Cavite to mediate. So on December 17, 1896, Bonifacio together with his friends, brothers, and troops went to Cavite and they agreed to form a revolutionary government o pamahalaang pag-imagsik which would lead the revolution. So, diri na nagsugod nga nagsabot na sila na mag-meeting for the election for the revolutionary government para na mag-lead sa revolution. So nagsabot na lang ang duha na maghimo na lang sila og government pinaagi sa pagbutar kung sino ang deserving. So mo na ni siya ang the Tejeros Assembly dito na naitabo kung kinsay na elect as a president and so on and so forth. So, on March 22, 1897 again, Aguinaldo regied an election of the rebels, Tejeros Convention, to show that he was the proper president of the revolutionary government. Aguinaldo was surely sure that he is the right person, he is the right to be the president of the revolutionary government. A convention was held in Tejeros in order to settle the dispute between the two councils and to decide on what type of government should be installed. However, Emilio Aguinaldo was not at the assembly as he was commanding the Filipino forces at the front lines in Pasong Santol, Barrio Salitran, Dasmariñas, facing the imminent attack of the Spanish forces. And as you can see in the screen, we have the accounts of Artemio Ricarte, Andres Bonifacio, and Santiago Alvarez who will let us know what happened during the Tejeros Assembly.
Artemio Ricarte A.V. Borra, or what we have known him as General Artemio Ricarte. He was born in 1866 at Batac, Ilocos Norte, and before joining the Katipunan and becoming part of the nationalist cause or the revolution, he worked as an elementary school teacher in San Francisco de Malabon, a teacher of Spanish in Cavite by profession but a soldier by inclination. Artemio Ricarte was the father of the Philippine Army and the first chief of staff of the armed forces of the Philippines. In March 22, 1897 to January 22, 1899. And he was one of the officials of the Magdiwang function during the Assembly of Tejeros Convention. And during the Tejeros Assembly, he served as the secretary of the convention when Bonifacio began presiding over the session. And that assembly, he was elected as the Captain General of the revolutionary government. In 1904, during his imprisonment for subversion by the American authorities, Artemio Ricarte's account of the Philippine Revolution was titled Históricos de la Insurrección por los Asociados al Kamahal-mahal at kataas-taasang katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan kontra el gobierno Espanyol in las Islas Filipinas. And also, it was translated into English by a British journalist, Brecknock William Watson, but it was remained in a manuscript form. So Ricarte's memoirs were published in Tagalog in 1927 in Yokohama, Japan, with the title Himagsikan ng mga Pilipino laban sa Kastila. The Hacienda to Tejeros was filled not only with the chiefs of Magdiwang jurisdiction but also with many of the Magdalo government. And among these are the Magdiwang men. Andres Bonifacio as the chief of Katipunan, Mariano Alvarez, Pascual Alvarez, Santiago Alvarez, Lucio San Miguel, Mariano Trias Glosas, Severino de las Alas, Santos Nocom, Baldomero Aguinaldo, Daniel Terona, Cayetano Topacio, and Antonio Montenegro.
As soon as the meeting was open under the chairmanship of Jacinto Lumbreras, who briefly explained its object, Severino de las Alas asked for permission to speak, which was granted. So, si Severino daw ni permission to speak, og maniiyahang giingon that before taking up the question of the defense of a small territory of the province of Cavite, it is desirable to speak first of the kind of government the country ought to have under the circumstances. This government to consider later all desired plans of defense. So, muna ang giingon ni Severino. And Vivora, or Artemio Ricarte, acted as a secretary during the assembly. So si Vivora di ay ang nahimong secretary during the Tejeros Assembly. And Andres Bonifacio opened the meeting saying, so gina-open na ni Bonifacio ang Tejeros Assembly. Muni ang iyang giingon. As you desired to set up supreme government to direct the insurrection, abolishing what was organized by the Katipunan and the resolution approved in the Assembly of Imos, ana siya, as a president of the Supreme Council of the Katipunan, I accede to your just petition, ana si Andres Bonifacio. But, first of all, I desire to ask you to recognize a principle as a basis of agreement in this or in the other meetings. So, muna ang giingon ni Andres Bonifacio. Ana siya nga, gusto ra daw niya or ginahiling daw niya sa kadaghanan nga ila-ilahon gyud to ang ma-elect nga mga officers kung unsa ba gyud kuno ilahang prinsipyo. Kumbaga kana nga prinsipyo dako gyud nga batayan bitaw para ma-elect as a officers. So muna ang giwish ni Andres Bonifacio og Dapat dayon daw kuno masunod ang gusto sa kadaghanan, ang will sa majority. So ni-approve man pud ang uban og let's proceed sa following offices in the government of the Republic of the Philippines. Naadiha ang President, Vice President, Captain General, Director of War, Director of Interior, Director of State, Director of Finance, Director of Fomento, and Director of Justice. So, muna ang mga offices nga kailangan og mga officers para mo dumala. So, ni-start na sila sa pag-elect og president. Si Emilio Aguinaldo ang nahimong president sa government of the Republic of the Philippines. He wins against Andres Bonifacio and Mariano Trias. So before sila ni-start sa pag-elect sa vice president, si Severino de las Alas stood up and said that as Andres Bonifacio secured second place in the election of president, he should be declared and proclaimed Vice President of the Government of the Republic of the Philippines. So, katong ginominate ni Severino nga sa Andres Bonifacio, wala na paminaw, kay nibase sila sa majority vote. So, ang na-elect yun nga Vice President kay si Mariano Trias Colosas.
The second account that will let us know what happened during the Tejeros Assembly or the Imus Assembly. Imus Assembly because it was happened in the Imus Cavite. It was the account of Andres Bonifacio. He was a leader of the Philippine Revolution, and through his work, Bonifacio helped the Philippines break free from Spanish colonial rule, and he was also known as the Supremo. This account by Andres Bonifacio is from a letter he wrote to Emilio Jacinto in Montalban from Indang, Cavite on April 24, 1897. It was entitled Si Andres Bonifacio at ang Himagsikan. It was first published in Joey P. Santos. During the assembly, Bonifacio was a chairman at the time. And majority of the said convention agreed to form a government that would lead and decide on what type of government should be installed. But Bonifacio already explained to everyone that this assembly could not be done because of the representatives of the other towns did not arrive. So, katong ubang katipunan factions sa laing towns, sa laing mga probinsya are not present during the assembly. So, dili sila kaapil og vote and dili sad counted ilahang vote during this meeting. And also, this assembly is lack proof of walay mga ebidensya, walay mga proofs because there were no documents. Kung walay mga papel-papel nga mga ebidensya, so kanang it's still invalid pa para kang Bonifacio ang kani nga meeting. But still, sa katong present, so katong naa sa faction during this assembly, already promised na unsa man gali ang desisyon and that Bonifacio will respect. So, before the voting started, Bonifacio laid down the rule that the assembly should respect whatever would be the outcome of the election, and it would not be questioned, and the new elected would be respected regardless of their stations in life or educational attainment. As the voting started, Emilio Aguinaldo and Andres Bonifacio was nominated for the position of the president, but he was lost to Aguinaldo. And after Aguinaldo was elected president, Severino de las Alas suggested that since Bonifacio got the second highest number of votes, siya na dapat ang mahimong vice president automatically. But nobody responded or nobody seconded or contested the motion. So Bonifacio, as chairman, ruled that the election should continue. He was again nominated for the position of vice president, but he was lost again. Bonifacio honorably accepted the losses. Mariano Trias of Magdiwang was then elected vice president over Mariano Alvarez and Bonifacio. Artemio Ricarte of Magdiwang was then elected as Capitan General over Santiago Alvarez. Then Baldomero Aguinaldo, and he was the president of the Magdalo group or the Magdalo faction, suggested that the voting should be done fast so they could finish before it got too dark. So this was followed by Emiliano Rigo de Dios of Magdiwang faction, elected as the Director of War over Santiago Alvarez and Ariston Villanueva, and Daniel Teyronia. Then finally, Bonifacio was elected Director of the Interior over Mariano Alvarez. He was nominated for the lowest position of Interior Secretary, a position created presumably as a sign of respect for the Katipunan founder, which he eventually won. However, after the decision was made and the election for the Director de Hacienda was about to start, Don Daniel Tayrona stood up and said that there is a cry being raised that Don Jose del Rosario be chosen Director of the Interior because there is a need that the position should be filled someone educated. It means Daniel Teyronia is against na si Bonifacio ang nahimong Interior Secretary. He was against because dili daw deserve ni Bonifacio mahimong Interior Secretary because he is not a lawyer. So he suggested the person as Interior Secretary is a lawyer. So nag-nominate niya si Jose del Rosario. It was stated that Daniel Teyronia trying to say that Bonifacio doesn't deserve to be sit as Interior Secretary because of the educational attainment. Bonifacio was greatly embarrassed and demanded that Teyronia retract the remark and apologize to the assembly. When Tyrona made to leave instead, Bonifacio drew a pistol and was about to fire at Tyrona, but Ricarte stopped him and tried to disarm him. Then, in the end, Bonifacio then invoked his role as the chairman of the assembly and the supreme president of the Katipunan and declared all proceedings that day to be null and void and left with his supporters. So in the end, Bonifacio discovered that even before the election were made, some of those who are from Imus Cavite had secretly spread the word that it was not good for them to be under the leadership of someone from another province. So it was for this reason that Captain Emilio Aguinaldo was elected as the president. So, pabor kayo ni Emilio Aguinaldo na madaog as the president since naaman sila sa Cavite, which is under ni Emilio Aguinaldo. Then it was already spread there that dili daw good para sa ilahan na ma-under sa leadership nga dili gikan sa ilahang lugar. So muna ni siya na nadaog mo'y rason mao nadaog si Emilio Aguinaldo as the president. So he was again the first elected president in the Philippine history.
Santiago Alvarez, he was the son of Mariano Alvarez, and general of the army on Magdiwang's side. Memoirs of General, it is a narrative account of Santiago Alvarez. We were considerate as we primary sources because it was a personal experiences and observation during the Philippines Revolution, which spat a katipunan and the government succeed against the Spanish rot. But before we will talk about event what happened in his narrative account, we will get to know who is Santiago Alvarez. Santiago Alvarez, he is known as Kidlat na Apoy or lighting of fire because of his inflame, preparing dedication during the Cavite famous Battle of Dalahican. Which is Battle of Dalahican is as one considered of the bloodiest encounter during the revolution. Competitive landscape, the Assembly of Tejeros was finally convened on March 25, 1897 because the Secretary Villanueva received a confidential information while Chairman Lumbreras declared the Assembly open and announced the main topic of discussion. People that here mentioned in the Magdiwang side a narrative of Santiago Alvarez. They are Andres Bonifacio, supreme leader of Katipunan are known as KKK, followed by Mariano M. Alvarez, Pascual Alvarez, Ariston Villanueva, Mariano C. Trias, Gigo Mojeca, Emiliano R. De Dios, Santiago V. Alvarez, Artemio Ricarte, Santos Nocan, Luciano San Miguel, Pablo Mojeca, Severano de las Alas, and Santiago Relo, all of them of the Magdiwang side. And the Magdalo side by Mimors Baldomero Aguinaldo, Daniel Terona, and Cayetano Topacio.
After Chairman Jacinto Lombrizas had declared the assembly open, he announced the main topic of discussions, which was how to bolster the defense in the areas still under Magdiwang control. Presently, Mr. Soberano de Alas Alas rose to speak, and when he was recognized, he said, "Before we discuss the minor details, let us first tackle the major issue, such as what kind of government we should have and how we should go about establishing it. Once we make a decisions about these questions, the problem of organizations and strengthening of defense will be resolved. That's why they call a meeting to make a plan in how to strengthen our army against the enemy, so that the two organizations decide to create a revolutionary government and able to bolster the defense in the areas still under Magdiwang control and Magdalo against to the Spanish colonizers and other colonizers." So Magdiwang group is led by Andres Bonifacio and Magdalo led by Emilio Aguinaldo. Mr. Severano de Alas Alas asked the Katipuneros on what kind of government should initiated, either republic or monarchy, and Bonifacio stood up and he said, "The letter K on the Katipunan flag has always stood for freedom." So Bonifacio suggested that must be republic, and then the crowd people agree to his statement. Because of a repeated clamor for the approval for the following of government of the Philippines Republic, the chair proceeded to prepare for an election to the following positions. And these are the following positions: President, Vice President, Minister of Finance, Minister of Welfare, Minister of Justice, and Captain General. Before the election started, Supremo said, "The candidate who get the most number of votes for each position should be the winner, no matter what his station in life or his educational attainment." So Supremo said that the candidate who got the most higher of votes will be the winner of the position. Dili na magmatter kung poor ba siya or pobre ba siya or lack of educational bana nga tao, ngalan nga siya mo'y gipili or gidaog ana nga position, siya mo'y ibutang. So after that, they proceeded to the election.
The Supremo Bonifacio appointed General Artemio Ricarte as a secretary. Then, with the help of Mr. Daniel Tiruna, he distributed a pieces of paper to serve as a ballot. When the ballot had been collected, the votes were read to be canvassed. So, the pieces of paper distributed serve as a ballot. So, dito nila isulat kinsa ilang gipili or ilang gibutaran. After they fill out, they put in the ballot box, and the votes will read to be canvassed. So, to basahon na nila kung unsay nakasulat tong mga papel nga gibutang sa ballot box. But Mr. Diego Mojica, the magdiwang secretary of the treasurer, warned the Supremo that many ballot distributed were already filled out and the voters had not done themselves. The Supremo ignored this remark. He proceeded with the business at hand as if nothing usual had happened. So, ingon pa, according pa ni Mr. Diego Mojica nga, ang mga ballots daw, nanay nakasulat nga mga ngalan, nya dili ang mga botante ang nagsulat ani. In short, na ay anumal niya nga nahitabo during sa election. But Supremo ignored him. He act that nothing happens, no? Nag-act lang siya nga wala siya na hibaw-an nga anomalya. No, so ilang gipadayon ang election. As the voting of the president, the elected officers are Andres Bonifacio, Emilio Aguinaldo, Mariano Trias, and among them, Aguinaldo won for the president position because Andres Bonifacio, he got 81 over 256 voters or botante. And Mariano Trias, he got 29 votes. And Emilio Aguinaldo, he got 146 votes over 256 voters or mga botante. They proceed to the election for the vice president, and the elected officers are Andres Bonifacio, Mariano Trias, and Mariano Alvarez. This time, Bonifacio didn't win. Instead, Mariano Trias took the position of being the vice president. And the result of the election is Mr. Emilio Aguinaldo won the president, and Mariano Trias for vice president, Artemio Ricarte for captain general, Emilio de Dios, minister of welfare, and Andres Bonifacio, secretary of the interior. But Daniel Tiruna object to Andres Bonifacio as a secretary of interior because Andres Bonifacio, he lack of lawyer diploma, or the implicit message being that he lacked the education for the position. He suggested Jose de Rosario, who is a lawyer and he is suitable for the position, and let us elect Mr. Jose de Rosario as a Secretary of the Interior, according to Daniel Tiruna. Bonifacio said, in my capacity as a chairman of this convention and President Supremo, the most venerable katipunan of the son of the people, which association is known and acknowledged by all, and I hereby declare null and void all the matters approved in the meeting. After he says that word, then he left quickly in the Casa Hacienda together with his supporters or follower. I make the story short, no, ang gusto ni Aguinaldo nga ilabay si Andres Bonifacio or ipalayo si Andres Bonifacio sa dito ilabay sa layo nga lugar. But ang iyang mga tagapayo nag-ingon nga kung dili nimo patyon hangtod nga buhi si Andres Bonifacio, dili ka mahimong legal as a president sa Pilipinas. So, moto no choice si Emilio Aguinaldo. So, iyang gisugo ang mga soldier nga ipapatay si Andres Bonifacio. No, so makarelate kay ta even nowadays ato ang election gihapon, no, sagaran mo gyapon nagahitabo nga naay mga dayaan or naay mamatay nga mga politician tungod sa eleksyon. So dira siya bag-o sa atoa tungod kay mo po nahitabo sa tuang mo nahitabo karon sa present days nato, no? So Emilio Aguinaldo is the first president in the Philippines, and Bonifacio is one of the heroes of in our country. And that's all. Thank you.
So those three accounts already told us what happened during the Tejeros Assembly. So to sum it up, the Tejeros Assembly resulted in the creation of a new revolutionary government that took charge of the Philippine Revolution, replacing the Katipunan. So katong time na nainsulto si Bonifacio kay niingon si Terona na dili deserve ni Bonifacio ang mahimong Director of Interior. Refusing to recognize the convention, Andres Bonifacio tried to establish his own rebel government. Then, in April 1897, on Aguinaldo's orders, Bonifacio was arrested in Barrio Limbon in Indang, Cavite for refusing to recognize the revolutionary government. In the brief but intense struggle, Bonifacio was stabbed in the throat and grazed by a bullet on the shoulder. His brother Ciriaco was killed. Then the wounded Bonifacio was placed in a hammock and brought back to Naik along with Gregoria and Procopio for a pre-trial hearing.